So we've got another 10 Midjourney styles for you again this week. So basically adding these phrases to the end of your prompt, separated by a comma, and you can get some very interesting results. And I'm going to start off with infrared, which is basically kind of like a light spectrum, and it does have an interesting effect on the images, making everything red and kind of like almost like an inverted color feeling to some degree, but not quite. When you look at the woman's face, she's got blue skin, like red hat, and just a very different sort of look. And I really just think it's an interesting sort of light spectrum that Midjourney has applied to this image. When you move on to the futuristic car, that reflection, the pink leaves, the blue sky, once again, it's almost like a duotone image, but like more photographic. But there's just something about the lighting which looks a little bit different. And when you move on to the Terminator, the way it's sort of made him sort of black and white in amongst all the pink, I think is a very interesting touch. And I don't know why he's wearing a business suit, probably because it's relating Arnie as the Governator to the Terminator, so that might be what's happening there. A samurai standing in front of Mount Fuji. Now this one I thought was really interesting and artistic, and just that way that the trees have the white leaves and the clouds, just really interesting use of color. Now World War I found photograph is a different effect again, and has a very, very real look to it and interesting take on what you add to it. So the woman's face looks like a woman dressed up as a soldier in a very sort of formal sort of uniform, and just that wearing on the edges of the photo, it does look like an actual photograph that has been found. Darth Vader, and this is where it gets interesting. It doesn't just give it that old photograph look, it changes a lot of the attire. So he actually looks like he's in an old uniform. So I think that's really cool, and the way that he still kept the helmet, but it's just interesting what it does. When you move on to a beautiful waterfall in nature, it doesn't look beautiful at all. It looks like something next to a prison, or like next to Alcatraz or something like that, and there's a few people up on the steps, but I love how dark and sort of just kind of evil it looks. And the futuristic car, I imagine that if someone showed this photo back then, it would have looked futuristic. It looks a bit crappy now, but it looks like what a futuristic car would have looked like back in, 1914, 1915, that kind of thing. And the person standing in front of it looks pretty rich. So not by today's standards, it just kind of looks dorky by today's standards, but I imagine someone like that might have looked pretty wealthy back in those days. And Mickey Mouse, of course, again, that same thing with the uniform. He's got a few soldiers and people standing around him. But it looks like a real photo of Mickey Mouse, except just like that costume. So it's very interesting the way it applies that effect to when you just simply add in a character. Now, Star Wars style is something I use a lot of Star Wars characters, but what happens when we apply Star Wars style to some of these things? So I added a woman's face, and it actually does add something really unique and cool. A little kind of like, looks like it has very fancy jewelry, but in a very Star Wars-esque way, the way it has the little machinery and bits and pieces on the face. Really interesting effect. Moving on to Mickey Mouse, it's sort of giving him that costume and a lightsaber, and this seems to be a bit of a go-to for certain things. So like when you look at Superman, he's just Superman with a red lightsaber, nothing special going on there. Same with Pikachu, bit of a different thing with the belt, has a lightsaber, but it does, while it does often add lightsaber and change the costume, every now and then you get something very interesting, so I still recommend having a play with it, something a bit different. Now, the family home, it just looks like a family home with stormtroopers out the front, standing on some water. I don't know how that works, but I actually just thought that was funny and wanted to include it here also. Brutalism. Now, brutalism is a type of building where everything is raw, there's nothing fancy added to it, just pure concrete and just absolute function and ugly building designs, if from a real estate perspective. So I added it to Barbie, and we've got the Barbie house is very plain looking, but with pink walls, but with that muted color, it looks kind of depressing, and I don't know what's going up top there with that other sort of Barbie character, but she looks like a bit of a mutant, but something very interesting effect when you combine contrasting sort of topics like that. Moving on to the woman's face, it's like the woman's face is part of the building, so a depressed looking kind of a concrete face, very interesting effect. And Superman, it's like his own brutalism style tower with the logo added on top. I really think it looks kind of cinematic in a way and pretty cool overall. The beautiful waterfall in nature has actually changed the waterfall from like a rock face to a structure, and I really love how this has turned out. Like the way that that ugly square chunks of concrete sticking out with the water running over it is something I did not expect. Samurai standing in front of Mount Fuji. It's actually replaced Mount Fuji with an ugly Brutalism style temple, but with a Japanese flair added to it. Has a very evil kind of look, kind of just cold concrete look, but with that Japanese kind of twist to it, which I really appreciate. Full spectrum infrared. Now we've already touched on infrared, but full spectrum adds a bit more blue, and I kind of wanted to include both. So when you add the woman's face this time, you get like kind of like two colors this time, not just the red and the white, but a little bit of a blue tone as well, although this is more of a pink than the red. Pikachu, it's added that glow to it. It's gone a little bit more infrared looking than infrared itself, but just with that different color. But they both get different effects, so that's why I actually decided to split them within this video. And when you look at the Hulk, again, that pink glow and the red sky, it just very cool sort of like use of color on that topic. And family home, modern family home, it has that same thing again. This looks more like infrared, but a little bit more of a blue tint in the neutral colors of the home. And Barbie, it's really highlighted the pink, and you'd use blue as the shadow, kind of like pink in the highlights, blue in the shadows, and yeah, just an overall cool look. If you look around the edges of the trees, you do get that really sharp infrared look. And now we've got faded photo. The idea of having a photo that looks faded, old, and kind of muted, but like a little bit like low contrast. The woman's face, it looks like the photo itself is literally dirty, worn, but a sharp photo nonetheless with that muted color applied to it. Mickey Mouse. Now this not only looks like an old photo, but an old statue of Mickey Mouse that was dug up out of a basement. It's a bit creepy overall. All the damage and just on the walls, it just looks old and decrepit and corroded. And this photo of Barbie looks like an old Barbie doll, and I really like the way it made it look like a real doll, but like with that faded look, like it was an old glamour shot from an old commercial or something like that. And Pikachu looking kind of depressed. His tail is actually sitting next to him, and it's not really his tail. It looks like it's actually a piece of wood that's been cut out and painted, and just destruction all around him. Now I don't know why, but faded photo does tend to make the scenes really depressing. It doesn't make like a happy faded photo scene. Everything's destroyed and depressing, which is something a little bit different. Modern family home faded photo. This home looks like it's from the 70s or possibly even the 60s. So I like the way it's actually made it kind of era appropriate to like an old home or an old photo. And Dead Punk adds like a real dead theme to things. It's kind of like cyberpunk, but with a real heavy theme of death added to it. So skulls and like shadows around the eyes. You can see with the woman's face, she's got all the kind of technology a cyberpunk would have, but there's sort of like paint and darkness added in certain areas where if you were to squint, she looks like she's been trying to paint her face to look like a skull. And if you move on to Mario, then his face has been replaced with a skull. The M on his hat has been replaced by a skull. There's little flowers there, which is something else you get with Dead Punk, but overall, it's just a cool kind of horror sort of aspect being added to these characters. And Barbie, again, she looks completely different. Looks like a tattooed up biker chick with pink hair, and definitely not what I expected, but still really cool. Homer Simpson, it's relied heavily on that Simpsons style, but it's just the amount of skulls that are just peppered around Homer with those roses. This is just a really cool looking image overall, and definitely not what I expected, but at the same time, when you add in the Simpsons, you tend to get some pretty cool styles anyway. Now, Darth Vader is wearing a jacket, he's got the flowers, and he kind of looks a little bit like Death himself, but not as many skulls that I can see in this one, but still an interesting look. Now, anamorphic art is that kind of art where viewed from a certain angle looks like, so they paint on the floor, might look like there's a crack and a big hole in the floor, and it's painted to be viewed from a certain angle. It doesn't give the exact impact, although it does with the floor on this one. Like if you were that crack in the floor was painted, that's what it would look like, but it also just has an interesting effect overall. And if you move on to the woman's face, it actually just did something completely different. So you don't always get the same effect, but you do still get something interesting. Moving on to Barbie, again, that interesting sort of effect. Things look destroyed. It does have a bit of a destruction and kind of like hole in the ground look to it. I guess that's why a lot of anamorphic art looks that way, and it's tried to apply that. And the samurai standing in front of Mount Fuji is actually looking at a piece of artwork, but just the way it's lit, looks really, really cool, and it's just a bit different than what I expected. Mickey Mouse, he is standing on some anamorphic art with a background standing up behind him. He is actually weirdly like a cartoon in the middle of like a real life image with the reflection. It's really different. I don't know exactly how it works, but pretty cool overall. Ambient Occlusion is a very interesting effect with like, it's got like real white looking kind of 3D images. So the woman's face, now I've seen a lot of images with this expression, but just like the way it's done that ambient occlusion look to it with the white and the really light looking imagery is pretty interesting. Superman, it's like a 3D render, almost like you could color it or paint it, like a statue that you buy to paint or something like that. And the Terminator, I love the details added to the jacket and the face and that, but with the more extreme, got the black background and more harsh lighting, this one has been a little bit more unique, but still pretty cool overall. And the beautiful waterfall in nature, very different look, very cool. The way that everything has that white look to it is a very interesting overall outcome. And the futuristic car looks a bit different, very cool, and just again, the white, it just has a very interesting effect. Now, Kinsugi is kind of like the idea of when something or pottery breaks, kind of like using gold to kind of fix it up, put it together. You see with the woman's face, she's got some gold and bits and pieces sort of like put in, so she's like a broken piece of like pottery or something with gold added to sort of fix up and fill the gaps. And the same with Barbie, she looks a little bit creepy, and I thought this was a really cool imagery, piece of imagery for that, considering Barbie's usually so clean and pink. This is a little bit creepy with the way it's sort of handled her. The Terminator looks broken. There's a little bits of sort of like wires and stuff in his neck, but almost has like that thing like he's just, the more you break him down, the golder he gets. And he just keeps coming, trying to kill you like in the movie. So something a little bit different again. And the futuristic car. For one, I love the fact it's a Mercedes. And this looks like a prestigious car in a prestigious house, but like more of an artistic look, like someone's used a lot of gold to try and dress it up and make it like an art piece more than an actual car. And beautiful waterfall in nature, gold water over black rocks, definitely a different take overall, but using the two elements. And I think that that was a very interesting image, and there's a lot of other images this did a great job with, but I really liked this particular image. And that's it for today, guys. Those are my 10 styles for this week. Like I said, if you want more, I'll pop a playlist up on the screen in a minute. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. Otherwise, I hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.